Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that takes leadership and puts it on trial. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the British ambassador to the United States, whoever it is this week. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We learn about whether the British car industry is having a good or bad week, which individuals can be accused of doublespeak, and of course the innovation and success that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have a chance to listen to our exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett, the former Home Secretary and former Education Secretary, and of course the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Steve Jones, the founder of European Active Projects Ltd, or EAPL to you and me. They have offices across the United Kingdom and across Europe. Founded in 2005, they have grown into a success story and have even recently worked on the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers. With the E in EAPL standing for Europe, and at a time when defence expenditure appears to be struggling to keep up with demands, it could be an uncertain time for the business. But speaking with Steve, he shares their plan for continued success into the next decade and gives some straight talking advice to certain individuals in Westminster. I suppose someone has to. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Nice to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. It's been a good 6 months or so since EAPL have been in the review. I think the listeners would be very keen to know what's happening with the company and what's happened with it since publication.
The company's carried on developing, so it's been developing extremely well. We've had a varied year in areas, so the southwest has done particularly well. The northeast has been a tad more difficult, but the company's still progressing well and still growing nicely.
Excellent, and I assume the next 12 months are looking fairly positive.
They are. We've got a few projects on the go which are adding to the business. So we've done an awful lot more work on warships, which has been good for us and of course for the Navy. And then with our land-based projects, recycling and wind farm, they've both been growing quite nicely.
Fantastic. And, I know the firm's been going now for, it was 15 years, if that's right, Steve.
It started in 2005, so just underneath.
Fantastic. And, I know the company did experience some difficulty, as so many did, following the 2008 recession, but you got through it and got through it well. And I know part of the strategy behind that was diversification. It'd be great to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we were in the marine fabrication side of it in terms of ship repair. And since the recession, what we've tried, we had a reliance on one major customer. And we've taken that reliance away. So we've concentrated on diversifying away from that particular area. In the main, we've done a lot of land-based work, so that's land-based fabrication work, recycling plants to overhaul and to install new lines in, and then also river works and the wind farm industry. That's been very good for us.
Both onshore and offshore, presumably?
Yes, both.
Fantastic.
Supporting the vessels and putting installations in by the seaside for the cables to go in and out of. I think
it may well have been earlier this month, but it was announced, I think, that you would be doing some work with the Ramsgate slipways, I think. So congratulations on that. I assume that's also very much to do with offshore wind.
It's to do with the repair and maintenance of offshore boats and vessels, but also some of the containers that are floating around between the Medway and the Thames, and we're doing a lot of work on that. There's been some work in London based on moving sand out of the area on barges, and we've been maintaining the barges, and it's been good for us and the local community as well of Ramsgate, and they've seen developments.
Fantastic. And I think I remember from your review article, in fact, that it's that EAPL were looking to improve its carbon footprint, something that can be challenging for any company, especially in the industry you're in. And perhaps people now are talking about that sort of thing more than ever. How have you and the company found this process?
It's been challenging to go through, but in terms of our carbon footprint, the more work that we do on sustainable projects, then the more that reduces it, and the more that helps that out. So ships that have scrubbers on, wind farms that we maintain vessels on that then have carbon neutral power, and then again recycling plants that can recycle 99% of waste, which is really, really good.
Well, that's superb. I guess once you start doing these things, it just becomes easier, becomes more natural. Once you have the culture going, it's something it's easier to put forward into the future.
It is. It becomes more and more ingrained into the company, into what the company does. For example, just something silly like reverse parking helps the environment because it uses less fuel when you set off again.
It's fantastic. Something I think really you don't think about unless you know. Yeah. And speaking, obviously that's something the whole sector is going to have to consider very seriously in how they go about it, and that will be a challenge. What do you think are the other sort of major challenges at the moment that the sector is facing? I
think the UK in general has been pretty good on trying to reduce its carbon footprint. There's lots of initiatives that are going on, R&D initiatives that we've been working on, which help the sector and look at reducing impacts on the environment, looks at ways of improving the environment, and vessels, they will always sail back and forth, they will always have to, and the more work that we can do to reduce that, I think the better for all.
Absolutely. And more generally speaking, specifically with the sector itself, it's looking for the next 12 months, especially. Are there challenges on the horizon you can see that you are going to have to perhaps deal with in a sort of headlong manner, as it were?
I think following what the government initiatives are and keeping in line with those, I think is one of the biggest challenges, and then it's what our customers want, because it's what they're driving part of this, and they're looking at using large scale equipment, which again the footprint needs to be reduced on.
Now, you've already mentioned, in fact, EAPL had that chance to work with, I think it was the Queen Elizabeth class carriers. It must have been, quite thrilling to work with a project that means so much to the nation and especially to the Navy.
I think it's such good news, the Queen Elizabeth and the Prince Charles. I think it's very good news for the country. It's a special warship. It's been built with modern technology. It's been all around the country. So it's been from Rosyth all the way around back to Rosyth. The parts have been built, and we were very pleased to be involved in that, and very proud of the work that we did, and the fact of the floating it all around to Rosyth to bolt it all together, and to get this Queen Elizabeth class working so well. I think it's been fantastic, and it's good value for money. Yes,
and it's extraordinary that the infrastructure that's used, and you can tell us more. Hopefully, it's extraordinary stuff. I think it was, as you mentioned, it was essentially built in blocks, which I think they was the model of how they built the Type 45s, and were able to bring it all together, which is an incredible thing, logistic thing to think of, really.
Yeah, I think all parties involved worked very hard on it, and were extremely technically capable. So there was a lot of skill involved, from top management down to the guy that fabricated all of them. Modern technology was used. Modern logistics was used, and it came together extremely well.
And when the Queen Elizabeth and the Prince of Wales are finally out and into the into the world. It will be a flagship not just for the Navy, but for British engineering as well, which is an exciting prospect. I know the government have also announced, obviously, we've started to build the Type 26 frigate.
Yep.
So hopefully more of that's good news for everybody.
I think it will be. The Type 26, I think, will eventually replace the Type 23s. And I think, again, that's good news. We do a lot of work on the Type 23s. We've not yet been involved in the Type 26s, but if we can do, we will do. And again, they're good, powerful vessels that take us into the future, no matter what the requirements are, whether they be large-scale country requirements or whether they be support requirements for any illnesses across the world, which the RFAs have been deeply involved.
Absolutely. Well, fingers crossed. Now, if you were, Steve, put you on the spot a little bit, if you were Secretary of State for the day, for 5 hours after lunch, you had a magic wand. What is it you would implement? What do you think the government could do that would help the sector, help yourself?
In terms of that, I think promotion of shipbuilding back in the UK, I think would assist. There's still a lot of shipbuilding that goes on in Europe. It could be done in the UK. The Sir David Attenborough being built in the UK, I think, was an extremely good thing. But all the Mars vessels for the carriers, they were all built abroad. And I think the more building that you can do in the UK, I think will support that, because again, you'll build it, you'll repair it, you'll have all the shipyards in place, and you'll have better facilities.
Absolutely. I think it was that old Churchill quote, which was the Admiralty had demanded 6 ships, the economists offered 4, and we finally settled on 8. And maybe that's the sort of the attitude we need again.
I think so. I think that'd be really good.
Now, speaking of, I think it would certainly be remiss of us if we didn't talk about a little bit more. We live in extraordinary political times, which I think is a fair thing to say, if an understatement. From where you're sitting, what are your views at the moment on what we're witnessing that's going on in Westminster at the moment?
Well, as part of the name of the company, European Active Projects, sees where we are within Europe.
Quite.
I think it's extremely important that we are in Europe. Brexit discussions over the past probably 4 years, not 3, because there's a year before, have taken the country away from running itself, developing itself and growing, and I think that's probably been painful. My concern is that it will be a fudge at the end of the day. Both candidates for the Conservative Party have said what they want is Brexit on the 31st of October, and I believe that it will be a fudge. The economy can't afford not to have transient workers coming in and out, and we use them, and they're very, very important to us, and they keep the economy going.
So I imagine the last thing you need is if that weren't to happen, you would have to perhaps even employ essential people to fill in paperwork for you to make sure that these visa applications, if that's what they are going to be, to go through.
That's exactly what I have to do. That's exactly what I'm planning to do, is to employ another administrator to make sure that all the work permits, all the visas are in place for the people that can freely travel at the moment.
And I think, and you really alluded to it there, this has gone on for so long. And I think no matter your views, it has. You can speak to any business really, anywhere in the country, indeed much of Europe, that do any trade with the country, that it has become a distraction to the point where business is almost had to stop functioning in some areas because of the unpredictability of it. How damaging have you found that?
It has been. It has been stuttering, especially for if you look at the motor vehicle industry, they put plants on stop, preparing for April. We've not done that, but we have seen a stutter in the commercial marine environment where people are sort of, rather than doing all the work on the vessels that they want to, they're doing all the work that they have to do, and there's a big difference with that. And that's again waited until a result of Brexit is going to happen. And it's been that long that I am a believer in the people need to have another look at it, because things have come to light over the past 3 years.
Do you would advocate then another vote, another referendum?
I would. There were 5 million people signed a petition.
I suppose some might say a little less than the 17.4 million that voted to leave, but I think it's a lot of people I think would worry with another vote that if it's a similar result, if it's a different result and a lower turnout, it might just drag the whole thing on for even longer.
It might, but if Theresa May can have 3 votes in Parliament, then people ought to be able to have 2 votes.
Now, in terms of, and it's not just business obviously that's suffering, the whole civil service appears to have been engulfed with this, as does most policymakers in government, and where no one is having a conversation about industrial policy, about defence policy. I know that Jeremy Hunt, obviously, is currently running for leadership of the Conservative Party, therefore the Prime Minister, has advocated higher spending on defence. I think our current defence spending stands at a little over 2.1%, but that includes, of course, not just Trident, which take up a percentage of it, but also pensions, things like that. So I'm sure that's at least some positiveness there, that perhaps from your point of view, that perhaps that spending might be going up.
Yes, I mean, we are obliged to spend 2.2% of GDP on defence for NATO and United Nations. So we're obliged to do that.
If only more countries did it, so.
If the rest of the members followed suit, it would be better. But I do think that our Air Force has shrunk, and
yes,
our Army has shrunk, and we probably need to bolster that and need to increase spending on defence, and it will keep us for the next generations.
Absolutely, we only have to look at the last month to see whether it's trouble in the Gulf, unpredictability with allies, or indeed the South China Sea. Peace through strength, I think, used to be the phrase.
Very, very true. And if you look what the Chinese are doing, they're spending an awful lot on defence, and they're also spending an awful lot on manufactured islands around China.
Yes, something perhaps they probably shouldn't be doing, but if they fear no one will stop them, I suppose they won't stop. Now, before we get carried away with that, I think perhaps just to turn back again to domestic things. Young people today, perhaps more so than for a while, seem less interested in joining industries like your own. What would you say to young people? I'm not talking, 20, 21. I mean, sort of 16, 15 years old at school, GCSEs. What would you say to them in encouraging them to do the right subjects and follow the right path to end up in your industry?
I agree with you fully, and it's quite frustrating. I take on 1, 2, 3 apprentices a year to bolster, and because I went through an apprenticeship, I find it valuable. I spent some 13 years at part-time college before becoming a managing director, and I think it's important that you can go through that. You learn how to use the tools, fabrication methods, and it's very, very important. However, people keep pushing towards university placements and the lower unis, and they push towards customer service apprenticeships and retail and management apprenticeships, whereas industrial apprenticeships, I think, can offer more. They can offer better long-term solutions whereby a skilled man can then develop into project management and supervisors, and their earning potentials are much greater, and their lifestyles are much better in that way.
Absolutely. And Steve, you've been in the business for a fair while, I think it's fair to say. If looking back, what do you think are the values that have ensured your place, and how would you recommend those to young people?
It gives 40 years of stability. So if you're good with your hands and you have some GCSEs and you can go into that environment, it means that you have a skill for life that will be a high-paid skill for life, and it will allow you then to develop through manufacturing, fabrication, fitting, electrical work, onto, once you get to your late 20s to your 30s, into supervision, management, and senior level management. And there's so many people in my industry that started as apprentices and are now managing directors or chief execs or operations directors.
And I think it's exactly the type of thing that school boys and girls need to hear more.
Yeah.
Look, Steve, it's been a pleasure talking. I'm glad to see how EAPL is still raising standards, and I look forward to chatting again before long, Steve.
Okay, many thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for your time.
You. Goodbye. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Steve, and especially learning more about the sector. I have a feeling that politicians in the very near future will begin to align their thinking with Steve regarding defence spending and where it goes. Let's just hope it's not too little too late. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in Tony Blair's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute of Blind People and the National Alzheimer's Society. And when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to David. Here it is now. We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation, whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognise they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. Came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative Association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread in the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I'm right in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
It took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we are in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want, it's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my own constituency and say, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done.
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. And there has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, not even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently, that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear. Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick, they can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get, I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship.
Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through Parliamentary Review inwards, but we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works, secondly, the complexity and difficulty of it, and thirdly, the way in which they need to tell us, I mean, I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. In that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no day zero where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it. That's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress, and we'll punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people, is there something you'd point to be optimistic, looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognise that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through, and we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union, and we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Old Star to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.